For decades, the public school system in Chicago has been defined by a deep geographic divide. A legacy of redlining and persistent neighborhood disinvestment has locked generations of students into an entirely unequal playing field. The data reveals the scale of this divide. In the city's low-income neighborhoods on the south and west sides, the high school graduation rate trails more affluent districts by more than 20 percentage points. This gap is directly tied to a funding model that relies on local property taxes, meaning poor neighborhoods cannot generate the revenue required to properly equip their schools. When faced with this kind of glaring disparity, the immediate response is usually visceral. Parents, teachers, and advocates take to the streets with passion and demands for fairness. But passion alone does not write laws. Unstructured arguments, regardless of their moral weight, are easily sidelined by decision-makers facing tight budgets and political pressure. Forcing actual change requires the mindset of a policy architect. This means moving past the protest and utilizing a rigorous three-step methodology: diagnosis, prioritization, and mobilization. Translating raw empathy into the language of pragmatic policy is the only reliable way to compel those in power to act. Diagnosis requires the four elements of a persuasive policy recommendation. Element 1 is status, the precise baseline, like Chicago's 22% funding gap. Element 2 sets criteria, the state mandate schools must meet. Element 3 is interpretation, separating symptoms from root causes. For instance, high crime rates in these neighborhoods often coincide with lower test scores, but research shows crime isn't the direct cause. The causative root issue is systemic underfunding tied to local property wealth. Finally, element 4 is the outlook. If the funding gap persists, you forecast the data-driven consequences of inaction: a less educated workforce, slower economic growth, and heightened demand for public assistance. Utilizing all four elements creates a reinforced argument, preventing policymakers from dismissing the issue as too vague or proposing simple fixes that only treat symptoms. Phase 2 is prioritization. You map solutions on an importance difficulty matrix. Top right are major projects, like overhauling the state funding formula, requiring complex legislative coordination. Top left are quick wins. Expanding mental health services scales quickly with fewer barriers. Strategically, secure quick wins first. Success on a smaller scale builds the political momentum and credibility needed to eventually take on the major projects. Prioritizing this way protects your coalition. It keeps your efforts focused on achievable milestones, rather than stalling out on the hardest challenge first. The final hurdle is mobilization. Even a perfectly prioritized policy will fail if it is pitched to the wrong person. You must identify who holds the power to act. Using an influence and interest matrix allows you to categorize the key players, whether they are teachers' unions, community nonprofits, or government officials. Once you identify the decision-maker, you must tailor the recommendation to their specific constraints. A school board member might prioritize budget efficiency, while community leaders focus on public equity. If your pitch solves a problem for the decision-maker, they are far more likely to sign. Understanding the unique needs of your reader is the cornerstone of persuasive communication. Without that alignment, the reform will not move forward. Let's return to the educational divide in Chicago. By applying this structured methodology, a vague plea for better schools becomes a targeted policy pitch. It is a phased plan for a needs-based funding model, backed by root cause analysis and championed by a unified stakeholder coalition. This is the role of policy writing. It functions as the invisible machinery of social progress. It requires balancing deep empathy for those affected with the cold bureaucratic pragmatism required to navigate a system. Systemic inequality is not an inevitable fact of nature. It was built through deliberate policy choices made over decades. Because inequality was engineered, it can be re-engineered. With the right framework, the right priorities, and the right audience, you can architect a more equitable system.